Hello and welcome to Todd versus
BBD.
Today we're going to be playing Modern, and we actually have a pretty hefty number of new cards in our decks.
Yeah, we do. Yep.
Modern, you wouldn't really think it would get shaken up too much by Khans of Tarkir, except we do get access to new fetch lands, which is kind of cool, you know?
Yeah.
But there's also a new mechanic, or an old/new mechanic out of Khans of Tarkir that actually works pretty well in Modern, and that is Delve.
Yes.
Delve is actually pretty powerful when there's so many, cheap cantripping effects, so many fetch lands, so many cheap removal spells that your graveyard's just going to fill up. So any sort of Delve card that you want to play, as long as it kind of fits the theme of your deck, I think it could be really good in Modern. So today we're going to be doing deck techs on both decks. I'm going to be playing a Grixis Rabblemaster deck. We'll call it Young Rabble for now. But let's go and take a look at the deck, and then after that we'll get to Brian's deck. All right, so as you can see, the creature base is just my favorite creatures ever printed. It's Young Pyromancer, Snapcaster Mage, and Goblin Rabblemaster, and a little bit of Vendilion Click on the side. I think that Goblin Rabblemaster is just one of the best red guys that I've ever seen, and he kind of fits the theme of this deck pretty well. And what this deck wants to try to do is basically fill up the graveyard with cheap instant sorceries for either Disruption with Inquisition Spell Pierce or removal spells with Lightning Bolt, Fork Bolt, Electrolyze, Stoke the Flames, Murderous Cut. A lot of removal spells. And then card draw with Gitaxian Probe and Serum Visions. We're trying to utilize Young Pyromancer's triggered ability to just continually make guys while killing their creatures and hopefully just take over the game from there. I'm trying out Stoke the Flames because it's so good it was so good in Standard with Young Pyromancer and Goblin Rabblemaster, and it's still good in Standard with current Goblin Rabblemaster that I wanted to try it out again because I don't think there's a better feeling than Snapcaster convokes Stoke the Flames, trigger Pyromancer. That just feels so good. But, the rest of the deck, we have, actually, I know I've already talked about everything. But, there are a lot of decks in the format where, your removal spells are going to be dead. And that's why I wanted most of my removal spells to be burn-based. That's why we have Electrolyze, Fork Bolt. So if those are dead, they just go to the Dome. Lightning Bolt, usually kills something early. But if they don't have anything, just go to the Dome and we can play the aggro game. One cool thing about Young Pyromancer in this deck is that it's kind of a lightning rod effect against another deck that has like Abrupt Decays, Dismembers, cheap removal spells. They're going to try to kill this guy on the spot. Because if they don't, you're going to untap and make like 2 or 3 guys off of it pretty easily. So what this does is when you cast Young Pyromancer on 2, if they kill it on their turn immediately, you get to untap and cast Goblin Rabblemaster. And usually it's going to make at least 1 goblin, sometimes 2, and be attacking. And that's pretty big.
Yeah, like I do like the fact that you do have that like dynamic there, and also then there's like just a lot of good synergy between like Young Pyromancer and free spells too, like Gitaxian Probe.
Yeah, I love Gitaxian Probe in this style of deck. We get to see what our opponent's trying to do to us, triggering Goblin Pyromancer, and there's the early play of just Snapcaster Probe to draw a card if you need to keep your the juice flowing while you set up in the early turns of the game. The mana base is probably not exactly correct. I'm pretty bad at building mana bases, but I know that I wanted to try out the Scars of Mirrodin duels in this deck since we have access to 2 different ones for our colors. There are going to be games where I open with Darkslick Shores and can't cast Lightning Bolt on turn 1. The basics can be a little awkward, but we have access to 8 fetch lands, 7 lands to get off of them, 3 of which are basic, 2 Steam Vents because we're a base base blue-red deck, and then the 6 Scars duels. So
yeah, and I think the Scars duels are fine because like 3 mana is kind of the top end of where you're casting spells.
Yeah.
Like you're probably going to want more mana later in the game, but it's okay if they come into play tapped after that point because like Snapcaster and 1-drop or Rabblemaster are really like the top end of what you're trying to do.
Agreed. All right, guys. Well, that is Young Rabble. Let's go and take a look at the sideboard, and then we'll get to Brian's deck. All right, so let's start off here in the sideboard with our anti-affinity hate, because I hate affinity. We have 2 Shatterstorms and 1 copy of Vandal Blast. Now, for those of you who follow me when I play Tarmo Twin or Rug Twin, I almost always have 1 copy of Vandal Blast on my sideboard because the card is so phenomenal in a Snapcaster Mage deck against Affinity because you can use it early to sort of be a tempo play, taking care of like their Cranial Plating, Arcbound Ravager, or one of their early guys. And then late game, if you don't really have to cast it early, you can just overload it, and it turns into another virtual copy of Shatterstorm. Yes, it does cost 5 to overload. That is a little expensive, but once you get to the sideboard games, you're going to have a lot more removal in your deck, and the games are going to go longer, and you're going to be able to get to that point in the game. And I think just the value of being able to have a 1-mana, versatile spell like that alongside Snapcaster Mage is just too good not to have in a 4 Snapcaster Mage deck. As far as more disruption, we have 2 copies of Thoughtseize and Negate against combo, as well as a Counterflux. Against big mana decks, we have 4 Molten Rain, but they're probably actually going to come in this matchup too. Brian's going to be playing a blue-white-red deck that we're going to talk about in a little while, but this card just hammers on decks that are a little slower. Celestial Colonnade is one of his main win conditions, so having Molten Rain to take care of those is pretty sweet. And if we can keep him off of a color for a turn or two, that might actually give us enough time for our Goblin Rabble Master to get going, which is great. Against Splinter Twin decks, we have Combust, a Dismember, and a Spellskite, and the Thoughtseizes. And then last but not least, another copy of Forked Bolt to come in against Affinity, Birthing Pod decks, etc.
Yeah, so, any X1 heavy.
Yeah.
I actually think that Molten Rain is like one of the best cards in Modern right now. So.
Yeah, it's a fantastic sideboard card, and we're pretty sold out regularly on StarCityGames because it's just an old, good common for a format that's pretty sweet. So. Yep. Anyway, guys, that is Young Rabble. Let's get to Brian's deck, and then maybe a little battle a little bit.